board. Thank you guys for coming. Thanks for being a part of this conversation. Our Synod executive, Sue Wonderland, asked me to kind of moderate a conversation about what we're seeing in Ecclesial Formation in 2021. I am, in some ways, wanting to share with you a particular vantage point that I have. Okay, so I'm wanting to share the vantage point of what it means to be at one of our regional denominational seminaries, and how we live into our mission to do the broader work that we're called to do at the seminary. If you're interested enough to kind of show up to this space, I kind of assume or presume some things about you. And again, because this is a conversation, I'm going to ask you each real quick, because we've got the number that we can, to just unmute yourself, share your name and kind of your role or location at the judicatory level, local level, congregational level. And if we could just do that real quick, and then I'll circle back with kind of how we'll work this conversation. Martin, you unmuted first, so please go ahead.
Okay. Marty Neal, actually go by Marty, but I should change my name, I guess, on my screen. But I graduated from PTS in 2018. I'm currently pastor of 2 churches that are yoked together in the Ford City area, which is about 45 minutes north of Pittsburgh. I can be on campus in about 45 minutes. So that's kind of my situation as a pastor, and then of course my participation at Presbyterian. In the COM, I'm in a CPM role.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. Erin, do you mind if I move to you?
Sure. My name is Erin Cobes. I am the pastor at the Presbyterian Church in Punxsutawney. And I have the pleasure of serving with Marty on our ministry commission in the CPM role.
Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so we've got 2 CPM folks who are you guys co-chairing this?
No, we're both just members of the team.
Perfect. Okay, thank you guys both for being here. I'm just going down the line, Peggy. You guys are all in a line on my screen. You're next. Thank you.
I'm Peggy Bonfilio. My church membership is in Tarentum, Pittsburgh Presbytery, and I serve as chair of CPM.
Perfect. I think I got an email from you at some point in the recent history. Welcome. Nice to have you here. Suzanne?
My name's Suzanne Brooks-Cope. I actually serve a UCC congregation, St. Matthew's, but I'm chair of the CPM for Lehigh Presbytery.
Wow, Suzanne. Okay. Let's co-lead this thing. No, I'm joking. But yeah, I have some questions for you, and I wonder about some challenges that you're facing there in Lehigh too. Thank you. And then Robin.
Hi, I'm part of Redstone Presbytery, and I am a ruling elder on CPM. And actually, this topic is kind of a close one to me. My late spouse actually had been a commissioned lay pastor when that was the language. The faith tradition that he started in was not Presbyterian. And then the folks who are coming to us most recently are all going down paths that were not, Presbyterian born and bred. So I think this is a good conversation to be had.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I'm sorry for the loss of your spouse.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been that kind of season. Because Sue asked me to moderate a conversation here, part of what I'm doing is actually a little bit of data gathering. So I'm eager to hear from you, and I've got some questions throughout this next hour for what you are doing, what you are seeing, how you all are engaging candidates. We're all participating in this work of formation together. And so I'm interested in what you're experimenting with. And I'll share with you what we're experimenting with at PTS. Generally, how we're going to order the hour, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me briefly, and then a little bit about the context that we find ourselves in PTS. Okay, so like we're a particular context with particular challenges, particular strengths, right? And then I'd like to share with you some vignettes about actual students. Okay, I want to disguise the data as much as I can so that if you're the pastor of this student, you might not recognize them, but these are real people with real stories. And this is really representative of what we're seeing in the last few years and longer at PTS. Then I'd like to discuss a little bit about what you guys are seeing in candidates. So I've got a few questions for you then. Then I'm going to talk to you about our program, what we're doing at PTS, what we've instituted for Ecclesial Formation, kind of how we got there, what was the background, what led us there, what are some of the questions we're trying to ask, some of the problems that we're trying to solve, and what we're seeing as we literally just started a new formation program this January and February. And so that's kind of the arc of this discussion. If you would, we're all pretty Zoom proficient now, so mute and unmute as you have need. I am single parenting our pandemic puppy today. So if she gets to barking, we kind of know what to do, and let me apologize in advance for the pandemic puppy. But let me kind of start with a little bit of, I want you to know who I am as I come into this work, right? So Doug said we've worked together at the Presbytery, and so kind of have that context about the Presbytery, worked at the Board of Pensions together and now at a seminary. And this is after, my husband and I were ordained together. And in January, we had our 15th year anniversary of ordination, right? So we served congregations before I got into middle judicatory work, and we've planted a church. So he's one of these 1001. He's got a church plant that meets in our home, although it's not meeting in this pandemic, and it's been very pastoral care heavy. But I say all that to say, like, really, I see my focus and my call to encourage and equip people. And really the thing that I'm always talking about, and it's not just because it's in my job title, but the thing that I'm always talking about is formation. So when I'm in meetings and we play that kind of Zoom square bingo, people get bingo for me as soon as I say formation, which I can't go a meeting without saying. But I say that as a cradle Presbyterian. And I don't know how often we're using that term anymore, but I'm a cradle Presbyterian. My parents were teaching at a Presbyterian college when they, a historically Black Presbyterian college, when they got pregnant with me. I was raised in the Presbyterian church, baptized, confirmed, old school, ordained, and installed in the Presbyterian church. I grew up in a historically Black Presbyterian church, which, if you know enough about the Black Presbyterian churches, historically and traditionally, sometimes we're trying to out Presbyterianism, right? And so I just kind of say I was formed pretty traditionally into our system. I went to a Presbyterian seminary. My husband was not raised Presbyterian. He was raised Southern Baptist, but he went to a Presbyterian college, Austin College, one that takes its affiliation seriously, then on to seminary and the Presbyterian way. So I just say that to say that, like, the conversation I'm having about how things are changing, It's because I was trained in a pretty traditional formative way, the historic way that folks have come on through the system. But that's less and less true, as I'll get to in a minute. Now let me talk to you about PTS. Marty knows because Marty just graduated, but PTS is increasingly big tent. We are one of the historic Presbyterian churches and Presbyterian seminaries, and probably regionally close to most of you, maybe not Lehigh, but yeah, Lehigh. We're historically Presbyterian affiliated, but increasingly big tent. I pulled out the numbers of our currently 139 students because I wanted to see specifically what was our breakdown. And you would imagine that Presbyterian is the biggest minority of students, right? It is. No, it still is. We still are, right? Out of our 139, we've got 40 Presbyterian students. That's full and part-time. But let me tell you what, we've got 23 Baptist students, 15 non-denominational students, and 20 Methodist students, which means that while we are the biggest minority as Presbyterians, we really are not the dominant cultural group, right? Dominant denominational group on campus. And that's not to mention the, dozen or so Episcopalians, the Pentecostals, UCC, the collection of more conservative Presbyterians that I kind of lump into one category, AME Zion, AOG, Kojic, Lutheran. Marty, am I telling the truth in your experience?
Very much so. It was my entire time there was very diverse, and the numbers you're mentioning here were kind of very true then as well.
Yeah, thank you for,
Might have been a few more Presbyterians, but generally speaking, yeah.
Yeah, and so, I say this to say, when you are sending your candidates, when our folks are coming to a local Presbyterian seminary, they are coming into what is going to be, they're still going to be kind of the minority denominational affiliation on campus. As our tent increases, and this is a good thing, this ecumenicalism is a good thing, but it's important to name they're not being immersed, perhaps as we once were 25, 30 years ago, in a Presbyterian ethos and culture. We've just hired our first non-Presbyterian president. If any of you have heard that news or seen that news release, the Reverend Dr. Asa Lee is coming to us from Wesley Theological Seminary. He's Baptist and has been trained at Methodist institutions and at Episcopal institutions, and really leads a ministry that is big tent now. And so we are pushing into this bigger tent kind of ethos, even as we are hiring at the top level of the seminary. And so again, I think this is great and exciting, but again, the purpose of this conversation is about, okay, so how are people being formed in Presbyterianism? So it's important to name that this is our context that we're in. It's much more ecumenical than some folks might appreciate. And again, the culture of the place is increasingly interested in kind of, I wouldn't say non-denominational, but I would say kind of post-denominational and maybe even post-congregational ministries, okay? That's gonna come up shortly as I share a little bit about our students. Now, Doug, I've already talked to Sue about this. If you can pause recording for just a minute, because I'm gonna dig in with some real stories of real students, mindful that we have a grad recent enough that might know one of these people. I might even fudge a few more details that I had previously folks that have a bent toward innovation. We gain rich cross-cultural engagement. This is to what you just said, Robin, to what you said, Marty. Like we gain that kind of engagement. And then we gain people with a curiosity about our tradition that enables us to do that, that self-reflection, that translate, nothing like teaching, right? That helps you learn about a thing. But Peggy and Suzanne, anything more? I mean, there are many more things, but like things that we didn't cover, things that weren't on my list that you see.
I can't think of anything new that you said. It helps the church to push the envelope a little bit more outside the box, be better at adaptive change, which I think is a real struggle for some real traditional churches.
Absolutely.
But I don't have much to add. What you said, great things.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for adding that. Anything else?
You used the phrase big tent early on, and this broadens our fellowship. One problem that I see, because I don't see these kids, these inquirers and candidates as early as you do. So as a care team member in the CPM process, I find that some of our folk really don't get the Presbyterian thing. And so it becomes a care team issue or charge to teach them what Pittsburgh Presbytery requires of inquirers and candidates, which makes me wonder frequently how much of that we need.
So interesting. You ended on an intriguing note there, Peggy. But you're transitioning us into, my next question, which is like, what do we lose? In what ways are we challenged? When we have a group of folks coming in increasing numbers that have not been formed in a Presbyterian congregation or within a Presbyterian tradition. So like, what do we lose in that? What are our challenges? And you've just named one of them, kind of, in my words, they haven't experienced our processes or our protocols, right? So they don't know the process, which is kind of insider language. But what else? What do we lose, or what are challenges?
Well, I don't know if it's the same, but what strikes me is that instead of wanting to follow the Presbyterian tradition, what I want to do is overlay my, whatever it is, my denomination on the Presbyterian Church, instead of the Presbyterian Church overlaying itself on their background.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's kind of the number one. What I experienced in all four of these candidates is the word ideology could be negative, and I don't mean this in a really negative way, but they're kind of coming with an ideological bent, and the Presbyterian Church almost becomes the vehicle through which I can lean into that. Yeah. So that's a challenge, right? It's a real challenge. What else?
Ayana, this is Doug. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Let me just add to what Robin said. As you know, as I work for the Board of Pensions, I've been an executive. I've chaired COMs and CPMs and numerous presbyteries. This is what the board is saying in this conversation. I wasn't planning to share this, but you've hit upon some things that we're discovering. And that is, as we do these seminars at Princeton and Columbia and Pittsburgh and elsewhere, the nature of the students are changing in that there's a number of them taking our First Call, First Step seminar who are denominational shopping. They're not even sure what denomination they're going to land in. There are some saying, I don't know what my calling really is. I came to seminary And I really don't know. And the other person, we hear stories of, I did this because I feel I want to do this. And I have a passion for this, so I need a platform to do this. And that's where there's this tension between overlaying personal passion over church, because you ask them, did you grow up in a church? No. Did you go to Sunday school? No. Do you worship at a church? No. Have you gone on a mission trip? No. And yet you want to look into doing something in the church? Yes. And so I don't want to use the word selfish, but it's all about them versus an institution we call the church, which is a shift for many. So there is that tension. And here's my question: is the ecclesiology of the church, how the church is manifest in the world today? Tim Cargill laid out a lot of really good things that are changing. But how do these individuals who are so self-driven and self-passionate about an ideology, as you might have said, and they're overlaying it to find a platform, I think the church is going to have to deal with what that means.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, you kind of hit on all those points, and you and I have had many of those same experiences, as we already disclosed to this group. Yeah. But yeah, that really, that's kind of the sum of the challenge right there, is that we have folks who aren't aware of what the culture, what it means to be Presbyterian. They don't know the language. That's a challenge. They don't know our acronyms. That's a challenge. They might not have had, and I put this in my little blurb because I think it really, really matters. But they might not have had a historical relationship with a Presbyterian pastor. And I think we can't, for those of us pastors in the room, we think we're important, right? But we would also say ecclesially, there's something to that relationship, right? And to that work of care of the soul. And so we have folks that are coming that have not had somebody kind of walking with them, challenging them, reflecting back to them the growth that they see or the besetting sins that keep rearing their head. They haven't experienced spiritual care in moments of crisis, in moments of national crisis, in moments of personal trauma. And so just, you can't underestimate, and that's why I'm saying it to this group, the power and importance of having walked with a Presbyterian pastor for a life, or even a longer season of life than simply first year program at undergrad, right? As an example. Another challenge that I see, and again, we've touched on this in different ways, is there's not a relationship to a congregation. And we know within our system, you have to at least get a group of folks to vote on you in order to become an inquirer. And if I could be so bold, we also know that when a young, eager person comes to us and says, I'm thinking about wanting to maybe be a professional Christian, there can be a lot of eagerness around that versus a lot of, critical, and our system isn't meant to be critical right off the bat, right? It's meant to be a discernment process together. But we know that we're eager for those folks to come forward. And so people can become inquirers really with not much more than about a half a year of participation in the life of a congregation. And I think that probably means some real things in a COVID reality too. Let me move it along. Let me tell you about what we're doing at PTS. We've taken all of this, right, and really created some hopes for how we do formation. We were seeing that as a seminary, people were coming perhaps without that formation from a congregation, maybe not even from a pastor. And so they're in this relationship, maybe not yet with the CPM, but they're here and we've got them at the seminary for 3 years. So what can we do in order to do some of that formative work? So we've created what we call denominational houses of study. We are not the first people to do this. Duke Divinity School has this, Eden Theological Seminary has this, and plenty of others. I didn't mean to give special shout outs to those two. But these are cohort-based groups of students that are affiliated not theologically, but denominationally. And that distinction between kind of a denominational versus theological engagement was discovered through research with judicatories. The hopes for these cohorts would be that we would, keep people in the denomination, just said plainly that people wouldn't leave the denomination, but that we would be preparing people for our churches, our congregations that are in need of leadership. And then the purpose of these cohort groups is that we would be forming people who would embrace our system, people who could be good spiritual leaders, yes, thoughtful Christians, yes, but also good presbyters, and can do all of what we listed as really the gains that we get, which is to innovate and create in healthy, God-honoring ways within our system, right? So that's the hope of these cohorts. So this is a background. We went and talked to judicatory leaders. Now this is, we're ecumenical, so we were talking to the Methodist and the Episcopalian and the Lutheran bishops, right? I'm going to focus on the Presbyterians here, but we went and talked to the judicatory leaders. We went and talked to the EPs and said, okay, what are you seeing? What's coming? What are you needing us to do? We can't promise to do it, but what are you needing us to do? Here's some of what they said. We want students to get into some kind of community where they can learn foundational principles of Presbyterianism, where they can be, quote, acculturated to this particular community of faith, and that students can learn our foundational core values that undergird the polity. See, our polity presumes that people know what Presbyterian values are. Our book of order doesn't really work apart from kind of congregational life, right? And so what judicatory leaders told us is that we want some kind of acculturation into what it means to be Presbyterian. We want people who are grown-ups, judicatory said to us. And that speaks to some of what you said, Doug, about you might have used the word selfish. You didn't want to kind of lean into that, but there is a kind of who we follow Jesus, who came not to be served but to serve, right? And so there is a kind of shift that happens when one is leaning into that leadership process. So judicatory said, we want you to help us in that work of people making that shift from wanting to be served by the denomination to wanting to serve the broader world. We asked the judicatory leaders, okay, what kind of pastors should we have leading in this work? And we got a lot of feedback about what kind of pastoral leaders should be helping us in forming and leading these cohorts. People who had run the race a little bit. People who were not straight out of seminary, right? Not within their first few years, but people who had at least weathered some of the storms of congregational life or ministry life, who could really speak into some of those deeper formative aspects, right? So we let the judicatories really give us feedback about what kind of leadership would be good, what kind of programs would be important, what kind of outcomes they wanted to see. I mentioned at the outset, kind of the denominational variation of PTS means that the dominant narrative is not our process. And sometimes, I mean, this is in some ways one of my first conversations with more than my local CPM to say this, but it's important to name CPMs that we're not, our CPM process is not the thing that's going up on the bulletin board every, you know what I mean? Every week. And so they're not really being steeped in those elements of our process, like writing your statement of faith, like ordination exams, like preparation. Now we do that, but yeah. And then another thing that judicatory said they wanted was work with the soft skills of ministry. How do you foster emotional maturity? How do you work on adaptability? How do you understand leadership? How do you understand pastoral leadership? How do you move from a public persona on social media to actually being a public figure within your local community? Because oftentimes the pastor, whether she is leading a nonprofit or leading a small congregation in a very small town, she becomes a public figure, right? And so judicatory said that they wanted that kind of thing from us as a seminary. So we formed these houses of study. And like I said, they are cohort-based groups where students come together voluntarily. They are led by 2 or 3 clergy who are rooted in their congregation, rooted in the tradition, whether or not they, have been historically Presbyterian is less important, but there's some rootedness to what they've done within their work. The leaders come together and they get to speak into what the programming is going to be year over year. And again, we've just started this, so in our inaugural year. So they've lifted up as people who have had field ed interns over the years, as people who've had folks coming in. They've lifted up the kinds of things that they think are important. And then they commit to being the group and team that is going to walk through a formation process with the students that embraces both what it means to have a Presbyterian identity and what it means to successfully navigate our process. But without ordination being the end goal, but with faithful ministry presence being the end goal. So we've launched 3 of these houses of study, Episcopalian, non-denominational / ecumenical, and then Presbyterian. We have about 12 students participating. And after the first couple of meetings, I sat down, it was in a Zoom room, but I sat down with the leaders and I said, okay, what are you hearing from these folks? What are you seeing? And here's some of the feedback that I got from the leaders. Now, some of these comments are going to seem maybe triggering. I don't mean them to be triggering, nor do I mean them to, but like, these are what our leaders said. Almost everyone had a vision for ministry that was highly nuanced, bespoke almost. And very few had a vision of congregational ministry. So most of our Presbyterian inquirers and candidates right now do not have a future vision of themselves in congregational ministry. I think our CPMs need to know that. The second thing, and again, I'm not trying to be triggering here, I'm just relaying data and I'm a little over time here almost. Jesus was not the dominant narrative of what people were bringing to the table. This is incredibly important for us. Again, I know there's all kinds of theological and ideological stuff that we wrestle with as a church about this, but Jesus was not centered in some of the understanding that folks had about their sense of call. Three, there was an incredible amount of creativity when people thought about where could they take the gospel, right? I hope you don't think I'm talking out two sides of my mouth, that like Jesus wasn't centered, but there is this sense of like, I can take a gospel out. There was an incredible amount of creativity that folks lifted up when they were thinking about where could they go and what could they do. And then fourth, there was an incredible amount of anxiety around our process. And it was not really understood as kind of cultural, you know, we as Presbyterians, and especially as cradle Presbyterians, we understand, you know, like we have these mechanisms and these, you know, three-legged stool that helps us discern in communities, CPMs, individual congregation, individual, right? They didn't have this language. They didn't have this sense of group discernment and church-wide discernment. Rather, it was a kind of anxiety of selling oneself or jumping through hoops in order to kind of get into the club. Those were 4 big takeaways. So again, what we've seen, even as we've started this formation work, is that everything that students are bringing into it, they just carry it right into the process. And so it becomes part of our work to untangle that. Now, I didn't super manage time well, so we are technically out of time. Can anyone give 5 or 7 more minutes to sharing a little bit about what you've done? Okay, I want to honor people's time, so if somebody has to jump off, except you, Doug, you have to give 5 more minutes. But Erin, Marty, Peggy, Suzanne, can you share what you guys have tried? We are trying cohort groups with really intentional pastoral mentorship and leadership. What are you guys trying?
We've talked about, and then pandemic out of 6-week, 6-evening, 2-hour classes, teaching some of the skills, teaching, I guess you have to teach how to moderate a session meeting. And you have to teach bedside care. Mm-hmm. You have to teach crisis care. And those things have to be instinctive, but when they're not, particularly because we are ordaining to a greater call, not to a particular church, or not particularly to chaplaincy, or not particularly to camp ministry. We're ordaining to serve the whole church. And that demands a broad set of skills that maybe will come out of this house. I'm chagrined that you only have 12 takers out of 40.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Preach.
Oh
That's not important to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Pittsburgh Presbyterian has talked about those things, probably in conjunction with some of our neighboring presbyteries, because to find the right person and the right set of people available at a particular time is going to be.
That's right. And part of what we're doing with the houses is making sure that at a minimum, students are exposed to a session meeting, a Presbyterian meeting, whatever denominational and or synod regional meeting we can get them to throughout their course of study, so that even if they were not shaped in a Presbyterian congregation, they've chosen to do their field ed at the jail, and they're committed that all they're going to do is plant a skateboarding church, right? That they will have seen all of the pieces of our denomination, our process, that is, throughout this house of study. So yeah, we're committed to making sure that students are at a minimum exposed to all of the pieces of our system and kind of layers and levels.
You believe that seeing a Presbyterian meeting will not make them become Methodist?
That's why the cohort, I mean, I think it's a really great point. That's why I believe, you seeing a Presbyterian meeting in and of itself, without that kind of relational network that you can then talk about what you saw, have what you saw interpreted for you, ask questions of what you saw, and be kind of schooled in, how to navigate what you saw, makes it less of, that's what used to happen at a congregation, right? But that's not what I remember when part of our confirmation, they marched us down to a Presbyterian meeting, or we were the youth helpers when our church hosted the Presbyterian meeting, right? These are all the little things that you don't see and taste and touch when you are late transplanted into the process. Yeah, Aaron, I want to give you a chance. I think you had some stuff to share there. What are you guys experimenting with? Thank you, Peggy.
Well, I'm brand new to Kiski Presbytery. So Marty could probably be better about, between the two of us, what we're up to here in our presbytery with our folks. So, I mean.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot. You guys think about it. Suzanne,
Oh, he's
Robin.
thinking.
He's thinking, yeah, okay.
Hey,
okay.
Ayana, if I could just add something, I'm so glad you're talking about the denominational houses and the nurturing that goes on there, because here's the flip side of what I see in my work. I talked to one EP and I said, how are your young pastors doing? And he said, we had 6 different young pastors called in the last 2 years, and all of them imploded and are out of their churches.
Yep.
And I said, why? And he said, one came to him and said, well, I told them in June what they should do in my congregation, and they didn't do it by September, so I left.
Yeah, so
that's frightening.
Well, let me just say another one. The congregation came and said the pastor didn't know how to do a session meeting, didn't know how to do pastoral care, and they didn't have an understanding of Presbyterian ethos, and there was such a disconnect. One of the other pastors went to the EP and said, I just know I didn't really want congregational ministry, but that's the only thing that was offered to me after my seminary experience. So I tried the congregation, but I realized I'm not made out for congregation. So all the things you're talking about, I hear on the flip side of it when I talk to EPs and I ask about young pastors and why is it that they go through this process of care process and all this time and energy and ordination exams and everything, and then they get into a church and within 6 months to 18 months they implode and they're gone. It's sort of sad.
You might not remember me saying this, but when I said what were our hopes for a formation program, the third thing on my list was avoiding quick burnout. Yeah. We used to say within 5 years people had left the ministry after ordination. Like everything else is accelerating. That doesn't surprise me that people are leaving within 6 months to 1 year. It's the burnout can be absolutely radically quick. Yeah.
Now there are some good stories, but just to say there are some really good stories.
Sure.
Where young pastors come out and they have a very different view, and it catches like fire, and there's wonderful things happening. But there are those where the expectation of the individual and the expectation of the congregation is pretty far apart.
Yeah, and again, leading this, as I said, not being shaped in a congregation. Yeah. You don't know what to expect in congregational life. Yeah.
Well, I'm a little concerned about our time.
Yep. We're at 7 minutes. Yeah. So I want to offer a couple of things. I am not recruiting for PTS, but I am open to conversation because I think this formation question is so important. So you can please feel free to contact me at ATETER. That's A for Ayana, TETER, my last name listed there, at pts.edu. And we can continue the conversation because all of you are in the region that are sending your candidates to PTS. we would love to have you require of them to share in the house. And we can talk about kind of what that looks like, but to encourage them really to take advantage of these opportunities. Students can feel like, I've got so much with the curriculum and, my family, that they just feel overwhelmed, but these 3 years are precious. You and I know that these 3 years are precious and they will never get back this kind of unstructured, believe it or not, time to really work on their own formation. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you for hearing a little bit about what PTS is doing, but more broadly, that what you're experiencing is not unique to you, that you are not alone, that what we are seeing is common throughout our denomination, and that it is taking a village, not just of the congregation or just UCPM or just us seminary, but that we are really having to think creatively about how we can mentor and nurture people in a formation that they increasingly haven't gotten. Do not hesitate to email or reach out with questions. Thank you guys for coming. And
Ayana, on behalf of the Synod, I want to thank you for taking time. I want to thank the participants for coming and being a part of this whole day and whatever parts. But I hope you found what Ayana has shared with us stimulating, gives us food for thought in our own roles in our presbyteries about the new leaders coming up and what we might do to help them along the way. So Ayana, again, on behalf of the Synod, thank you so much. And
thank you guys,
everybody.
And enjoy. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace to you guys. And I look forward to continuing the conversation as we can. Bye.
All right.
Thank
And
you.
see some of you at 1 o'clock for mine. Take
Bye,
care.
Doug.
Bye-bye.